Good morning and welcome to today's Cornerstone Chat.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Smith, the Executive Director of Cornerstone Community Development Corporation. Thank you for joining us today for the third of a series of discussions as part of Cornerstone's Healing Illinois program. Healing Illinois is a state-funded program which strives to address racial inequality and social unrest in a meaningful and productive way. Healing Illinois' goals are to promote dialogue by facilitating conversations that build connections and understanding across the state. Healing Illinois also encourages collaboration by connecting and engaging in racial healing activities and facilitate learning about this crucial topic. I'm very excited about our Cornerstone Chat today with our guest, Dr. Tyrone Powers, a former FBI agent, author, criminal justice expert, and community leader, just to name a few of his many accomplishments. I now turn the discussion over to today's moderator, Ms. Yvonne Orr.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, and we'll be hearing from you later. Dr. Powers, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Let's just go ahead and jump in. I want to draw attention to those legends on the back of the wall among yourself, and tell me a little bit about the pictures behind you, what that meaning has for you in your life right now.
Yeah, there's so many people who have helped us get to where we are, and who have plenty of lessons that could even take us further if we took the time to read them and think about them. It's always interesting to me when we go back and we try to come up with new solutions, and these people wrote volumes on what they were dealing with, what the solutions were, from Carter G. Woodson to the advocacy of Rosa Parks. I tell people all the time that Rosa Parks was doing so much even prior to the Montgomery bus boycott. She was dealing with women who had been raped, and she was dealing with the court system, and all the things they've done in the past are lessons and plans for us in the future, but we don't go back to them. And so I don't have to rewrite new lessons or come up with new plans for dealing with the issues that we're confronting. I think if more of us remember what they wrote, what they said, what they did, what they sacrificed, the lives they gave up for us. And I always want to remember that. So every time I step into my office, the first thing I want to do is see all of these people looking at me, and never forget their legacy, their work, and their deeds, so that when I begin to write and work, I understand that I'm never alone. And I don't want us ever to forget about them, because I think they are part of the solution.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And you've since become a part of the solution since leaving the FBI agency. Let's tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now.
So I run a consulting group that looks at police use of force cases, that looks at policies and procedures, that conduct training with police agencies and others. I also headed a couple of organizations, the People's Plan to Dramatically Reduce Crime in Baltimore City, and the Children's First movement that tried to intercede and intervene in the lives of our young people to prevent them ever getting involved in this criminal justice system, because that's a whole nother thing that we'll discuss later on. But
Yes,
really doing writing, doing lectures, doing teaching at Bowie State University with students there, and at other locations. And I'm still the director of collaboration and special initiatives at Anne Arundel Community College. So a great deal in the community, a great deal in terms of writing, a great deal in terms of intervention with our young people, and also trying to deal with the issues that we're dealing with in terms of race and brutality in our communities, by working with some of the agencies who are trying to be more progressive.
thank you. We're here to talk about racial harmony, racial healing, and how we can navigate as a people, that's to all ethnicities, but particularly the Black people, in a world that's been socially unjust. It's as if we're in a new awakening post the murder of George Floyd. I say it that way because, intentionally, even though it was stated I can't breathe, and we had the hashtag I can't breathe long before the unfortunate death of George Floyd. I really want to know, how do we get here? Why are we still here? And what do we do about it from your personal perspective?
Wow, that's a major question. Well, you're right. Even prior to George Floyd, it's been an evolutionary process. In other words, we've dealt with this since coming here enslaved, even during the periods where we've made some progress through the courts with Brown versus the Board of Education, with other legal cases with Charles Hamilton Houston and a number of other people, the civil rights movement, the different movements. We've made some progress, but every time we've made progress, it's like, and I can tell you this partly, and we'll get to that, but the agency that I was with, the FBI, it's like there are people who want our progress to be extremely limited. And so as we begin to make progress, other obstacles are put into play, and especially where it involves our young people. So that evolution, a lot of our young people are dealing with the concept of arrested development. They're locked in one place and then they end up going astray. So with all the progress, all the people who have worked so diligently, we talked about the people on the wall and so many others, what you all are doing with Cornerstone, but with all the other projects and things that are going on, there are also obstacles that we have to consistently navigate and understand. And that requires, and I know everyone can't do it because there are people in our communities that are working and living day to day that are dealing with some difficult situations, certainly in this COVID era. But it requires those of us who have the ability, the time, to go back and do the reading and put those plans in process, so that that momentum that we were once building with all those organizations that were so courageous, was so progressive, and so solution oriented, not just emotional, but solution oriented, so that we can put those steps back in place to kind of change our directory or our direction in our communities and in other agencies. I've said this, and the agencies and the culture that we're dealing with, the racism, the social injustice, the social injustice in education, the miseducation, the graduation rates, those things are part of this culture. And it's going to take some significant, tedious work to overcome, because you're not going to change the mindset of many of the people who, for whatever reason, don't believe Black people should progress. But the strategies that we put in place are so extremely significant. The recognition that we're dealing with a culture that is stagnant, despite all the pontification and the wonderful speeches. And we saw what we just witnessed with the Black Lives Matter movement. Unless we put some strategic, specific things in place that are permanent, or that can be picked up on by this generation or the generations that come after, we'll be doing this again 10 and 20 years from now. And in history, the history that we talked about with the people on the wall truly dictate this, that we keep doing things over and over again, and we get excited when there's something like the protest that we just saw after the murder of George Floyd. And then after a while, we go back to where we were before, and then we have to reignite all over again. And the key is to specifically come up with policies, practices, and strategies that are permanent, not just emotional and for the time period, that are permanent. And I don't think we do that enough.
Policies, practices, and strategies. That's part of what you talk about in your work, but also in your book, and providing the decolonization of information. Can you break down what that means, decolonization of information? Because for most of us, we didn't even hear about colonizers until the Black Panther movie came out. What does that mean?
Well, in reality, even the solutions for our problems, with all the great and significant people we have in our history, most of the solutions that people bring to us for our particular problems come from colleges and universities, people who are pontificating, people who don't necessarily look like us. So even they've colonized the solutions. They know what's best for us. And then many times it's paternalistic and condescending because they say, we've researched your problem. We know this is what's best for you. Rather than these people, you know, the W.E.B. Du Bois and the Booker T. Washingtons and the Carter G. Woodsons and the Sojourner Truth and the Fannie Lou Hammers and those people who have written the solutions. They gave us specific solutions we don't read. I'll just give this one aside. I went into the office of a prominent African-American professor at one of the colleges and universities who I won't name. And he was sitting there saying, we've got to come up with solutions and we've got to come up with new strategies. And I said to him, look at the bookcase behind you. You don't have to come up. You're ignoring all of those people and their history. You just got to read what they wrote, because the strategies they put in place were permanent strategies. When Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Negro History Week, which became Black History Month, wrote The Miseducation of the Negro, he said to us, control a man's thinking and you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to go to the back of the bus or the back of the room. He will go automatically. So Carter G. Woodson was saying, control the education of your young people, control the messaging, control what they're being taught at every single level, and you control their future. If you allow others to do that, which is what has happened when we talk about the colonization of information, the colonization of strategies, the colonization of solutions, which are written in all kind of textbooks, what's best for Black people or people of color in general. When you allow others to colonize that, then the solutions will only take you but so far, because their interest is helping you make progress, but not helping you ultimately gain, I don't even want to say equality, but to gain equity.
Equity is huge. Let's talk about Eyes to My Soul. Congratulations on your 25th year of that publication. The Rise and Fall of a Black FBI Agent. That title alone is heavy. It's weighty. Tell us what was the origin to writing that book, and with the resurgence and the celebration of this 25th year of its publication, what does it mean for us now with your book?
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, some of the problems that existed and that I talk about in terms of policing, in terms of the FBI, in terms of their perception of communities of color still exists. And the title itself was leaving it up to the readers to see whether going into the FBI was a rise or a decline. Obviously, when I first went to join the FBI, I was a police officer first. When I went to join the FBI, there was a lot of consternation in our community. The FBI have such an antagonistic and hostile relationship with the Black community historically. And I was familiar with that. I attended Coppin State University, a historically Black college and university. I had a very wise mother who kind of was aware that I had brothers and family members, and I had the sages of the city is what I call them, very intelligent people who maybe didn't go off and get higher education, but was more educated than 90% of the people I've met in higher education, who kind of told me about that history. And so initially I was reluctant to join the agency, and I'm glad, in hindsight, I'm glad I did, because I learned so much about the things that the investigations, the strategies, the perceptions, the concepts, the things that are put in place in these particular agencies. And so it was certainly, by joining the FBI, it was eye-opening for me. I'm able to bring a lot of things back to our community. I've been able to bring things back to public officials and leaders, warnings and strategies, specific strategies that can work. And at the same time, you know, the difficulties I had as a Black special agent, like being in the academy and having individuals enter my room dressed in Klan outfits. And here I am with other special agents in the FBI Academy, and having this incident happen, having watched the investigation as a special agent in the FBI of Marion Barry, what ended up being a misdemeanor drug charge, but having watched how that setup occurred, having watched the investigations and the instigation and the infiltration of people like Mayor Coleman Young, who was in Detroit at the time, and having had conversation with him, having watched that from an inside point of view, having watched how those investigations are manipulated and put into place, and then coming out and being able to bring that information to certain entities who are willing to listen about how that process took place. So it was both difficult, which is you could be a
That's an
decline.
understatement. Yes.
Yeah, decline in your mental health and your ability, and then it's also enlightening because you're able to bring this information out. Not always publicly, because there's a lot of private meetings that I had, a lot of private conversations about strategies and structures and things that are happening. But to bring that out is also a rise, because it helps us get a better understanding of things that we speculate about, that we have suspicions about. It gave me an insider's view on how these things take place. And once you have an insider view on how they take place, you have an insider view on how to counter them, how to plans for them strategically, and how to help. And you'll understand this, and you can appreciate this. There's still a lot of resistance, even to you having the inside information and bringing it back to the communities and saying, here's the strategies to put in place. There are people who don't want to hear it. There are people who don't want to hear it out of fear. And there are people who don't want to hear it because it makes them uncomfortable. And until we get comfortable with being uncomfortable, then change can't take place.
I want to double back to something that you said that was quite jarring, given when you were in the academy, and how long ago it was. You're actually saying that while you were in the academy, some of your peers were the ones that showed up in your room in Klansman gear?
Absolutely. I write this in the book. Let me just add to this. When I first published the book, the FBI and the United States Attorney came at me and said, listen, when you joined the agency, you signed an agreement, and you can't talk about these particular things, because Congresswoman Maxine Waters actually had me come up to Capitol Hill to testify before Congress about some of these incidents under the penalties of perjury. So the things I write in the book, I've testified to under the penalties of perjury also. And I've talked about these things in other incidents. Like I said, the targeting of these public officials, the other strategies that were put in place, the infiltrations of mosques and other Black organizations, which was totally illegal and couldn't be justified even by the information that was being brought back by informants and so on and so forth. So I talk about all of those particular incidents, but I think what's equally as important, I talk about strategies to prevent that from happening in the future. And think about this. When I went into the FBI, the percentage of Black agents in the FBI at that time is the exact same, or actually is less now than it was back then. So there are less Black FBI agents. There are less agents, even agents. Not all Black FBI agents are agents who are conscious, but even of conscious agents, of FBI agents, we've actually regressed. But we don't even have that conversation. There was a recent conversation in the media conversation with agents who had been in the FBI, agents who have rose, like Jennifer Love Smith, who was in Chicago, who actually rose to assistant director of the FBI. Even she was talking about having to file 3 different lawsuits against the FBI for discrimination against women and the activities against Black FBI agents, about how agents are treated, agents of colors are treated. So it's an agency and culture thing. And clearly, if that's internally, then we know what's externally manifested in our communities and in the investigations that occur in our communities. So I think that's key. And those incidents, the reason why I go into them in detail specifically, even at the cost of the FBI could have, or the agency, the state U.S. attorney and the agencies could have come after me in those cases, was because it was more important to tell those stories, to understand what we're dealing with, so that we know why we're getting certain results in terms of crime reduction, in terms of drugs in our community, in terms of guns in our community, in terms of justice or the injustice in our courts, so that we could understand that. It was important to tell that story, even at the risk of prosecution by the U.S. attorney at that particular time. What backed him away from any prosecution was that I hired a law firm, and the law firm said to them, go ahead and prosecute him for writing this book. But if you put him on the stand, if you put him on the stand in court, he's going to even tell more, because he gets an opportunity to speak to that. And then they just walked away from it.
So one of the things, you speak of storytelling, and you and I have talked about this briefly I'm the daughter of two revolutionaries. My mother being a high-ranking officer of the Illinois Black Panther Party, and my father, a former member of the Move 9 and a political prisoner for 42 years before he got out last year. When we're talking about diversity within the FBI, how do you possibly combat that when you have like Judas and the Black Messiah out, that talks about this informant that ultimately worked for the FBI for years and received what I consider to be gifts that allowed him to have a sustainable income for his family for years to come before he committed suicide. You have 40 years a prisoner out that talks about the MOVE organization, and my brother Mike Africa's experience being born in prison. What would make a Black person today want to possibly join the FBI or any law enforcement, although we know many of us, Black and brown, exist within law enforcement, and then it becomes blue? What makes us, want to join law enforcement, period, across the board?
That's an excellent question. Let me start with the tail end of that. First of all, we've been asking for years through this criminal justice reform movement, through other movements, through other conversations, for better policing in our communities. And I will say this 100 times over. You're not going to, and even Dr. Martin Luther King said, you can't change the heart of a man. He said, when people ask him, was he trying to get others or whites to love him? He said, no, I'm just trying to keep them from lynching me. He said, no one can change a person's heart but some higher power. So what I'm saying, you can't consistently ask other people to police you better when you know it's not in their heart and head to do it. The only way to change that is to become the protection that you want to see, and to make that a conscious protection. In other words, in the 1920s and the 1930s, when the Irish decided in their mind that they were being treated badly by the other entities in policing, they made a conscious decision to take over policing and politics, which is why you had Daley, we had O'Malley. They made a conscious and strategic decisions rather than to ask people to treat them better. They were going to take over the entities and agencies that police them and that set the policies and treat themselves better. The whole concept of a paddy wagon is an Irish term, because the Irish, when they took over policing, rather than picking up their people and taking them from jail, they used a wagon to pick them up and take them home so they wouldn't have criminal records. So rather than ask other people to treat them better, they became the police in their communities. And I know there's always the difficulty, especially when you mention things like Judas and the Black Messiah, of Black police officers, of people becoming more blue than Black. But there's also people like me, who was from the very beginning at a historically Black college and university, but Dr. Raymond Ellis was preparing me to go into these agencies, be on the inside, so that I could facilitate some change, and if not even facilitate change, so that I could bring back information that have helped numerous public officials and others navigate problems that they were about to walk into. But we need people on the inside to do that. We need conscious Black policing in our community, and no one is going to protect us better than us. When I speak to the students at Bowie State University about going into this particular field, I teach them, I go through the history, the origin, the consciousness of being in this particular field, and telling them that if you want the opportunity to protect your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, your grandparents, then who are the best protectors other than you in a very conscious way? And you might as well get paid for that, and we control our own community. So the flip side of that is what you said, the Judas and the betrayers, and that could go into policing, that could go into the FBI and harm our communities. But on the other hand, the other option of not going in these agencies is asking people that historically seen us in a different way, who have historically attacked us, to treat us better. So when we ask for police reform, we're asking for people who we know, in many cases, not all cases, have an antagonistic and a hateful relationship with our community, to somehow treat us better. We're saying that we're going to put these policies in, rather than us taking over the agencies, developing our own conscious lines of people. We're having children, instead of developing them from kindergarten to go into these agencies to police our communities, we're asking others to treat us better. So here's the dilemma and the challenge. You make an excellent point with the challenge. how do we trust someone who come out of the FBI? One of the things I said when I first came out of the FBI, I went to the different communities and gave speeches and presentations on strategies and so on and so forth, is I don't need you to trust me. I just need you to listen to the information I give you. If you distrust it, then do your own research using this as a foundation and develop strategies based on what I'm saying. I'm not trying to marry you, trying to move into your house, not trying to be your best friend. I'm giving you information, and your distrust doesn't bother me, but I know if you distrust me, then you will research even further. So I'm serving a purpose. Even your distrust, which should be part of our vernacular and our personality, considering our history, is an asset to that. So our choices become, Yvonne, either asking others to police us better or to get better at developing our own policing. At one time, Black police officers could only make arrests in the Black community. When we first entered policing, our only job was to protect and serve in the Black community because we couldn't make arrests anywhere else. If we teach that history, as I'm doing with the students who want to enter this field at Bowie, at Coppin, and other historically Black colleges and universities, if we teach that origin and history, then we can get people to go into these particular fields with a consciousness of serving and protecting our community, with a consciousness of identifying when people are flooding our community with AK-47 and guns, as you had in Chicago, where freight trains were being stopped, happened to break down in the middle of our communities, allowing people to go in and get guns. If you're conscious and you're in these agencies, you're able to see that and investigate that. Here in Baltimore City, we had a situation where we had 80-some rapes of Black women weren't even investigated. The boxes were put in the back room, so sexual assault with Black women, the rape, the molestation that was taking place, weren't even being investigated. If you have conscious detectives, homicide detectives, sex crime unit detectives, then they will make sure those cases are investigated, and the protection of a Black woman is as equally as important as the protection or of anyone else. But those cases, we had a Black commissioner who came in and said, I found all these cases in the back room. They haven't even been, these women have been raped, sexually molested, harmed permanently, because a rape not only physically harms you, but mentally, all of your relationships are impacted by that, weren't even being investigated. If we get the right police officers, the right conscious police officers, the right people who look like us in this field, that will never happen. I could never see myself as a chief of police, as a detective, ignoring 80 sexual assaults and rapes of Black women, but others could. They made that less of a priority. They highlighted the homicides and say, well, we're busy investigating the homicides, not realizing that if you're a conscious Black detective or investigator, that a rape is kind of a homicide because it kills something in the person that is raped.
In the soul. In the soul. I want to jump to something you said triggered me. My parents raised me to be an assimilationist, right? So the moniker around my house was, you know, you have to assimilate in order to infiltrate. At one point in my career, I worked for the Chicago Police Department. I was the one that would come up with the copy for the news stories, go into the community to see what the streets are saying, and then develop the copy around that. And unfortunately, at one point, while working for the police department, leaving the scene of a very heinous crime, I was myself arrested, stopped on the street downtown, pulled out of my car through my window by police on bikes, soon to be followed by, you know, cars, put into what you refer to the wagon, and left for hours, not read my Miranda rights, not allowed to make a call. And it was what we call a white shirt, you know, a sergeant that came by, and they kept laughing at me and calling me all kinds of names and said, oh, she claims she has a police number, you know, so they gave my rank and file, and then realized, you know, going all the way to the top, this is a problem. And he made them apologize, let me go. They were subsequently fired because of my position at the time. When you have someone with my background, where my family was bombed, murdered, 11 men and women and children not allowed to come out of a flaming house, you know, a mother who lived in fear her entire life to her death of what she experienced as a member of the Black Panther Party. And here I am working with law enforcement and being arrested. How does someone like me, I have control now you know, just because they made sure I was educated at HBCU. But how do you help young people dispel their anger and deal with the fact that we are all on this planet together, and at some point in time we have to work together? What does that look like for you? You know, considering you don't seem to be the moniker of an angry Black man. How do you control it?
Yeah, first of all, you can't. Anger is an emotion that is almost justified considering the history and our condition. But the key is to tell young people how to turn anger into energy. For example, when I speak to I'm teaching a class called Race, Class, Gender in the Criminal Justice System at Bowie State University. And I was telling the young people, I said that when I was in the FBI, and this is fact, I've testified to this over and over again, a document came across my desk as a Black FBI agent. And this document said that when you go out to interview people in the Black community, understand that they are emotional, but not very intellectually. They won't apply the scientific method. The scientific method being that you have a hypothesis and you don't end that, whatever you're pushing for, until you have a logical conclusion. That is the scientific method. A hypothesis until a logical conclusion, not just a conclusion. And so what it was saying was that when we went out to interview people of color, that they will get angry, they will yell, they will scream, they will protest, they will march. But in the end, when all that's said and done, they will be right back where they started because they have no plan to bring that to a logical conclusion. They wants to march and the protest. That's an official document from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit about what Black people do. And we saw that over and over again. In the whole Trayvon Martin case in Florida, I saw massive people, and it should. Protests are excellent. They bring attention to things, but the key is to follow that up with some logical conclusions. And the Trayvon Martin thing, the stand the ground law that was in existence when he was killed, is still in existence. So with all the protests, all the attention, all the hoods that the NBA players wore, all the words across the shirt, that law is still in existence in Florida. So it had a important point because it highlighted it, and it certainly highlighted the life and death and the wrongness of the killing of Trayvon Martin. But what is the logical conclusion to that? And so I think from the standpoint of us participating in these particular agencies and bringing that back to our people, is to turn anger into energy. Okay, the anger is justified. The marches, the protests, the pushback is justified. But in the end, what logical conclusion are you getting to? Are you getting to a permanent solution to this? Are you getting to something where you change the culture of policing? Are you getting to something? I've always said dramatically reducing crime in our communities. We're watching the murders and the drug dealing and all that is very easily fixed with the right people in positions of power, because we have said this over and over again. Where do the guns come from? I know from a special agent with the FBI, the ATF can tell you the origin of a weapon. We got heroin on our street from Afghanistan, and there's no commercial flights from Afghanistan. So I know if we have the proper people with the proper background and education, I don't just mean formal education, I mean education from these people, the reading, the writing in place, that we can not only deal with the racism, the cultural issues, the healing Cornerstone talks about, but we also can dramatically reduce crime in our community and change the culture of the agencies that deal with us effectively. And I think that's what's key for us always to think about when we initiate anything. What is the conclusion and the solution we're trying to get to? Anger, we're going to be angry. There's no way you can experience what you experience and what I experienced without being angry. There's no way we can look at all the historical events of the lynchings, the killing of Emmett Till, what happened to our entertainers, whether it was Billie Holiday or some of our other entertainers who were brilliant entertainers but had to go to the back door, couldn't eat in restaurants, but still had to perform. All that pain, there's no way you can get around the anger. But the strategy then is how to change that anger into a constructive energy. When we were doing intervention in prisons, talking to the Crips, the Blood, the Black Guerrilla family, logically, if you got those young people to sit down and listen to you, they understood. I would say to them consistently, you're yelling east side and west side, and you don't own property on either side. If you own property, then I understand your defense of the east side or the west side, because we all have a right to defend our property. But you're just yelling that about areas of the city that are not even owned by you. You're being the centurions and the protectors for other people's property. Once I walk them through that, have that conversation, begin to talk to them about that, sometimes in church basements late at night, sometimes in other locations, about how to get out of the game that you're in, how to turn good money into bad money. Now, I have to admit, the newspapers here printed an article and said Dr. Powers is telling young people how to launder their money, because
No.
they don't want the colonization of information. They don't want us to come up with solutions for us, especially if the solutions we come up with are based on the history and the information that these people gave us. They want the University of Chicago, the University of Maryland, the criminal justice programs at Johns Hopkins University. They want them to colonize the information and have the solutions for people who have been experts in crime reduction, criminal justice, anger, what you've been through in those agencies, your story itself, what you know from your family members and what they've gone through, are also part of the solutions to our problems, to reducing crime in our communities, and also for us effectively changing these agencies, the culture of these agencies, so we can in fact get to healing. You can't heal if you don't change the culture, because you can't, if I'm in the midst of having coronavirus, for example, and you put me in the midst of a whole lot of other people who have it, that's not a healing process. So we have an incubation period. We have a period where you have to go be off by yourself. I can't heal in the midst of being out in the midst of other people. That doesn't make logical sense. So when we talk about healing in our agencies, we got to change the culture, the direction, and add some permanent solutions before we can really get to the healing part. Otherwise, we're playing with the term healing. We're not really healing people. We may be giving them a Tylenol to get the fever down, but we're not really healing them. We're just masking pain that will be here for generations.
And that's part of the beauty of having conversation, and really getting used to being uncomfortable in having those types of conversations. Leslie, one of our viewers, wants to know what you think about how we can weed out Black officers who are not conscious and who actually terrorize the community, and not just, Black officers, just the conditioned culture of some aspects of law enforcement across the board, all the way up to the federal government. How do we stop the terrorization and, murder of our people without allowing them to have their just time, in a courtroom? What do we do?
Yeah, the key is for more of a good officers of conscience, for us to start developing those officers, not just have them join the police department to get a job, but to start developing them from elementary school forward. Mayor Pugh, who was the former mayor here before she got into some legal issues, had brought me in to develop what she called a pipeline from elementary school into the agencies, teaching them everything we teach us about our Blackness, about our culture, about the history, and then guiding them to policing. She had actually asked me to develop and draw up. We did a pipeline from there on the way in. In the midst of those kind of officers and those kind of people going into these particular agencies, it is difficult for people to get away with what they get away with. In other words, what I've always said is that, this whole concept of a few bad apples doesn't make any sense, because if you're in a barrel for bad apple, that apples stink. And police officers take the oath and enforce the law against all, whether they're in blue jeans or blue uniforms. So if I'm a good conscious officer and another officer is putting his knee on George Floyd's neck, I'm not allowing that, because I took an oath to enforce the law, whether you're in blue jeans or blue uniform. So I'm saying, hey, man, that's you can't do. Hey, what are you doing? That's enough. And if I have to take some physical action, legal physical action against another officer, I can. So getting us in the age, identifying that, and having those officers who are of conscience, even confronting if necessary, and say, no, we're not doing that. We're not abusing them. Well, they committed this crime. We're not arresting them. There was a chief who I did not agree with all his policies, but Reuben Greenberg, who began to put some policies in place in South Carolina, where he said every officer that uses any kind of force against any kind of citizen must be able to articulate in a report, even if it was minor, because if you can't articulate why you did it in writing or in speech and in writing, then you shouldn't be doing it. He had a policy which says that anytime you make an arrest in the community, if the public come around, tell the public after you control the situation, tell the public why you're making an arrest. You're a public servant. You're doing this technically for them. If you tell them I'm arresting this individual because I believe he's chested a child molester and he's been molesting little girls in your community, then the public will say, you know what? Okay, we can understand it. Or I'm arresting this individual because he was involved in the murder of one of your sons and daughters, or that's the suspect in the public. But what happens is police officers go to the scene and say, look, this is none of your business. This is police business. Well, police business is the people's
our business. That's right.
Sir Robert Peel, who laid the foundation for modern policing, had 9 principles of policing. And his first principle is the police are the people and the people are the police. We need to make that a reality by more of us of conscious joining the agencies. And I think that will stop rogue officers for doing what they were doing. If there was a conscious Black officer watching this officer with his knee on George Floyd, calling for his mother, then a conscious Black officer would have said no. I know damn well I would have. They would have said, no, bro, that ain't happening here. That's not going to happen today. Or the officer wouldn't even feel comfortable putting his knee on his neck. But Black police officers who go into this agency, there's a wonderful agency headed by former Sergeant DeLacy Davis called Black Cops Against Police Brutality, who said that if Black police officers are conscious, work to dramatically reduce crime in the community, go after bad people, but also go after bad officers, then officers wouldn't be allowed to do what they're doing and brutalizing when you have excessive force cases across the nation, because the good officers are required. They have a duty to intervene. They're required to do something about an officer that will put his knee on George Floyd's neck. And that requirement doesn't just say, stop that. It requires that at some point, if you're watching a murder occur, which is what we did in the George Floyd case, that they take effective action to remove that officer who was not in any physical condition to stop you from removing his knee from George Floyd's neck. If you have a conscious officer on the scene, then he removes him from that particular position.
Tell me some active steps that we can take, people of all ages. What are some active steps that we can take now in this current climate to help heal our communities?
Well, I think that and let me just make this abundantly clear, because I think this doesn't get enough attention. I think me and you discussed this too. There are a lot of actions, because I don't want to downplay this. There are a lot of actions that are being taken place. They don't get media attention. There are organizations and people working in our community every day to dramatically reduce crime, to work on some healing issues. And it doesn't matter. Some of those organizations are religious organizations, and we know for a fact that it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or whatever you are. If you have a solution for our community, we should embrace that. You know, the student of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, once said that never confuse the methods with the objectives. If the objective is right, I don't really care what your methods is, will mean at the same objective. And he also indicated that when they pour you, and I always say this to people, young people, when they pour you over at night, they see that you're Black. They don't see whether you're Muslim, Christian, or whatever your faith or religion is. They don't walk up to your car and say, are you a Christian or a Muslim? Because depending on what religion you are is what I'm about to do to you. It's based on your color. So there are people in the community already delivering this particular message. There are people in the community that are already doing this particular work in our community. But specifically in terms of healing our community, I say engaging and educating the young people. I can't tell you, when you begin to have conversations with young people, I mean in our school systems, at elementary school, at middle school, and begin to teach them, not beat them, not criticize them, but actually teach them and develop a path for them, then you'll be surprised of how much they don't know. I'm even teaching the young people, and like I said, at Bowie State University, at other historically Black colleges and universities, and they will come back to me and say, Dr. Powers, nobody ever taught us that. One of the students said that their mother knew everything about the movement, knew everything about Fannie Lou Hamer, the Black Panther Party for self-defense, the purpose of and she said, but I live in a household with my mother. My mother's brilliant. And until you began to teach this in my class, I went home and said, Ma, how come you didn't tell? My mother said, well, I knew all of that. I thought you were getting it in school. So even in our households, We're not teaching the young people that. And when we begin to teach them that, they absolutely unequivocally get it. They absolutely unequivocally get it. We talk about the young people, we pontificate and have conversations among ourselves, but we don't do the intervention part. We don't talk to the young people and give them this history in an interesting way, in a way that they understand this history, in a way that they understand the pitfalls. Again, back to Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Month. If you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. If you control the thinking of the young people, the education of the young people, in many of our cities now, we have Black people in charge of education, and we're still getting the same results because we're still doing it the same way as others have done it. Booker T. Washington in his book.
I'm sorry for the interruption. You just triggered something. I don't want to forget it.
Feel free to interrupt me, because if not, I'll just keep going. So
when you talk about young people and where we are today, with all due respect, and I'm a part of that as well, I have to own that, we have not done them justice any more than some of these unconscious law enforcement officers and agents have. We have not protected them. We have not served them. Some adults, depending on the generation, when you come out of the civil rights movement, out of Jim Crow into a more subtle form of racism, racial discrimination across all types of aspects of our lives, where we cannot go in stores, we cannot live in certain neighborhoods, we experience redlining. I don't know that young people can hear us. They might see our mouths moving. They might understand some certain things. And certainly there are a large faction of young people that are already active and doing things. How do we organize, spread awareness? Because it's really about spreading awareness. And then, as you stated with your trust and in some of your presentations, it's about taking that information and knowing what to do with it, or doing the research for yourself. How do we establish trust? Because part of healing, there has to be some form of trust in there, I would think. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, trust is an evolutionary process. As I said, when I came out of the FBI, everybody said, here's a former Black FBI agent, how can we trust him? I began to say to them over and over again, I said, listen, so let me get this scenario straight. The FBI sent people into our community to infiltrate, and the FBI call those people assets. We get a chance to send somebody into the FBI, and we call them a traitor. You see the different kind of process? So he's bringing information back. He's identified himself as an FBI agent. This ain't what you saw in Judas and the Black Messiah. This ain't someone who's infiltrating and saying, I'm this and I should be that. This is someone bringing information and saying, this is who I am. Let me give you this particular information. So trust is an evolutionary process, and we should distrust people. I have different conversation with some colleagues. There's nothing wrong with distrusting people initially and having them earn your trust. We do that in our personal relationships. You don't just start trusting someone. You don't go on your first date with someone and they say they love you and you actually believe that, unless you've got some kind of sickness going on. They have to develop that and demonstrate that. The group The Temptations, I may be dating myself now, but used to have a song that says, I need a love I can see. Not the love you have to tell me about, that kind of love I can sure do without. In other words, it has to be demonstrated, because if you demonstrate it, I don't care whether you ever say it, I can say, damn, Yvonne, in everything she do, and all her work and all her history, I know she's in. She just never said it. And she doesn't have to, because she demonstrated. Even for those who are Christian, the Bible said you will know them by their deeds. It never say you will know them by their words, by their pontification, by their eloquence, because had we simply been able to change our conditions through preaching, we would change. I mean, in Baltimore City, in 94 square miles, we have 2,000 churches. We should be the most safe, saved, dignified people, but it's not just preaching. It's teaching our young people, meeting them where they are, galvanizing them where they are, and getting to them at an early age. One of the things that I'm more or majorly concerned about with this COVID piece is this distant learning, because our children actually need contact. We don't learn the way other people learn. Booker T. Washington was talking about that in Up from Slavery. He said, we're not up from the Revolutionary War. We're up from slavery. The methods, the techniques have to be different in educating our young people than whites can do in and that's not saying our young people are less. We're just saying we're up from slavery. We started in this country as the enslaved, not as what white people. So the education system, the process of engaging our young people, the conversations we have, the way we engage them have to be different. We have to understand the psychology for them to get to healing. They have to have the trust, which is an evolutionary process, which is what you just said. But how we do that is important. That's why the reading of these historic people, you know, the founder, the Elijah Muhammad with the Nation of Islam, who had a third grade education, who built the Nation of Islam. The reason he was able to build it across the nation is because his lessons were so simplistic, and young people picked up on that and changed their behavior. Every organization, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, you were right there in Chicago. You just talked about Judas and the Black Messiah. You talked about Fred Hampton at 21. Speaking of getting the young people, at 21, he was already knowledge out there and reaching other young people. It's how you deliver that information. It's an evolutionary process of developing trust, but it's intervention at an early age. We have Black teachers in all the school systems across this nation, even in Chicago. So the history of MOVE, the history of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the history of the United Negro Improvement Association, the history of the Nation of Islam should be a part of history and social studies in that school, when you have a captured audience as early as elementary school, because they're more willing to listen there, and then it's an evolutionary process to where you take them. And
so we're right before I bring Ms. Smith back in. I have a couple of final questions to tender for adults. You know, yes. The grown folks, as they say. You know, you mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer before, well known for the quote, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." To be colloquial, we tired. We working, we're doing all kinds of stuff. There are some perceptions about young people that, you know, we carry forth, a lack of trust in their ability to exhibit and implement leadership strategies and hope. How do we overcome the "we tired" concept so that we can work intergenerationally to achieve racial healing and racial harmony?
Yeah, two things real quick, because I know we're running all the time. We could talk for hours.
We could go all day.
But two things for sure. There's some of us who are no doubt tired. We're working 2 and 3 jobs. We're just trying to keep food on the table. But let me be perfectly clear on this. Having been across this nation and even outside this nation, there's some of us who have time not to be tired. I think this is a reinterpretation or even a misinterpretation. Depends on how you want to look at it. Of W.E.B. Du Bois' Talented Tenth. He said there are 10% of us who do have the time to work on making these changes every single day. And not everybody is working 3 and 4 jobs. Not everybody should be tired. Some of us are tired. Some of us are just too damn lazy, and others are scared. So there are different categories. So not all of us are tired. There are those people who are just trying to make it from day to day. But there are others of us who can do so much more to change the trajectory. And even those who are tired would be energized to do something different. We can give people tasks based on where they are, and they will increase their task when they begin to see progress. Here when we developed the Children's First movement, what we said to young people or to seniors, we just need you to walk through the school 1 time a day. We need you to go from one end of school to the other, because young people say so-and-so mother's in the school. You may be there for 5 minutes, but they swear they saw you on every floor of the school. So we need to task people based on their time, based on where they are. Allow them to meet them where they are, to take them where they need to be. Not everyone can do what you and I do. Not everyone had the luxury of time, but everyone can do something. Gil Scott-Heron said it best. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So when we task people as to what they can do to help heal our communities, to deal with the issues of brutality, to reduce crime, to enhance education, test them at different levels based on what they have, and they won't be so tired. We keep overwhelming people with, you should be doing all of this, then they get tired just listening to us, much less doing the work. But there's something that all of us can do, and some of us have to admit that we have more time than others to be a part of the solution. We're just scared or lazy.
All right, that is awesome. We have a quote at the bottom of our frame. Fred Hampton said, "We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight it with solidarity." Give our viewers, say, 3 things we can do right now to not only show solidarity, but to also promote racial healing.
Well, for those of you who can, begin to talk to the young people, first of all, in your households. In your households about this history, because it's hard to change your behavior when you don't know, when you're not educated, or you don't, and I don't mean education in a formal sense, but when you don't know this history. Yvonne, you and I talked about MOVE, some of the history you gave me. If you gave that out to some of our young people, what they were trying to do, the evolutionary process, you will see them light up. They actually love that kind of education and history. Secondly, you know, if you have a progressive organization, or you can support a progressive organization, join those organizations at whatever level you can. You may not be the person giving the speeches and there every night, but if you can give 15 minutes a week, do that. And then encourage our young people all the time to remember this history, to read, to work, help them in that particular way. And then think about some unique approaches to us developing a pipeline so that we become the protectors in our own community. You won't get the kind of officers that murdered George Floyd to change their personality. I don't give a damn whether you put in police reform, police policies, but you may have to become that officer so a knee doesn't go on George Floyd's neck. And then listen to this particular program and all programs that are solution oriented. Remember, the goal is to get to some concrete, permanent solutions, not just the emotion, that's important, not just the anger, but to turn anger into energy and turn energy into solutions that will last generations, even after we're gone, that allow us to have a legacy well into the future.
Thank you so much. And now we have Ms. Smith. Thanks for rejoining us. I know you were in the background listening to this awesome conversation.
Yes, and I was also applauding. First, I'd like to thank the State of Illinois Healing Illinois Project for this great opportunity to bring this a very important conversation to our communities. Thank you, Dr. Powers and Ms. Orr, for a very informative discussion centered around the racial inequality which continually exists. Doc, once again, your inspiration and your ideals and around racial healing are so valid. Your vision for our people and the racial equality is evident. And I mean, I can't even talk about your passion. I mean, it just rings through so clearly. We appreciate you and we thank you so much. This is the second time you've been with us at Cornerstone. We look forward to doing something with you again in the near future. And we'll make sure that we have more time, more than an hour, because you have so much to share. We appreciate everything you share with us. And so as we all can see, there's much work to be done to effectuate the needed change within our communities. If we don't start in our communities first, as Doc has said, Yvonne has said, especially in our other presentations, we cannot mobilize and show that solidarity that we need to have in order to really start to make some significant changes. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and that you will join us again for our next presentation, Manifesting Racial Healing, Creative Paths to Eradicating Racism. The flyer with all details and a hyperlink to join the discussion will be distributed later today. Please save the date, March 29th, same time, the same channel. Thanks again to both of you, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining, everyone.